This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here again with Ford Smith, founder and CEO of Ultranative. Ultranative is the ultra level of alternative medicine. They're a venture studio focused on transformative healthcare. They empower healers and entrepreneurs to innovate, disrupt, and scale in their mission to build a better world. Ford, thank you for joining us again. I believe in July we invited you to discuss how COVID-19 accelerated the cannabis sector. So we're glad to have you back.
Yeah, Hall, thanks, man. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for thinking of me.
Great. So let's talk more about your background. What did you do before you started investing in early stage companies?
I spent about 4 years in independent film finance / production and a brief 9-month stint in talent management before I realized that life is too short on the talent management side. The film production and finance side, that was fun. And it's still something that I dabble in today. But being someone's effectively high-level strategic assistant was not something I wanted to keep doing.
It's a tough life. Yeah. So what excites you right now?
The future of functional, alternative, and psychedelic therapies. I think that, I know. I think I have a deep belief through personal experience in using all of those modalities that if we're going to turn this earth ship back on the right course, that those are going to be an integral part to doing so, especially the psychedelics. So really interested in helping steward this newly commercialized market in a very holistic way. So
looking forward to learning more about that. We always like to get your advice for those that are investing and those who are starting up companies. So what's your advice for people investing in startups, in particular in this sector?
Specific to the functional psychedelic sector? Yeah. I think I'm taking a lot of my learnings from my experience in early stage cannabis kind of venture investing. I think that you got to have an ecosystem approach. You've got to be, I think it's, my analogy was like, it's hard for a private equity fund in New York to be making really solid, sound investments into early stage California-based cannabis companies. They just, it's hard to have a good perspective on what needs to happen and how you can offer the right strategic help and advice to scale these companies properly. I'm taking that same approach to psychedelics. We've not made an investment yet. It's been really 3 years of due diligence of networking, building the community, participating in the community, being a financial sponsor, making donations, things like that. And just really building the network. So you can identify what the landscape is going forward. I think the second thing I would say is really having a good lens on and an understanding or an advisory committee that understands healthcare, the current payer system, provider networks, things like that. Because as psychedelics become commercialized and clinically validated, they're going to need to integrate in the current Western model of medicine. And it's a big question mark right now on how that works. So it's it's a paradigm shift that we're all kind of going through. And I think the best thing you can do is be building a community and supporting the stakeholders within the psychedelic kind of renaissance, the people that have been carrying the torch, long before us. So supporting that network and then being able to bridge the gap into the healthcare space and understanding how this is going to integrate with the current provider and payer models that exist today.
So for those who are running a startup in the psychedelic space, what do you coach them to do before they go out to actually raise funding? Do they need to build a community first, or can they just go straight to raise funding based on the science and the evidence that they have behind their therapeutics?
I'm not really coaching anybody on what to do. I think that there's obviously been a boom in the psychedelic space in the past 6 to 9 months. 12 months. I think after having spent, the past few years, as a part of this community, it's clear to those inside of it who the kind of conscious, thoughtful companies and entrepreneurs are you've got a lot of the market that's moving towards, you've got a lot of Canadian, nothing against Canadians. It's just usually the first mover market that likes to go and identify these licenses or assets or IP portfolios and then take them public. And historically in cannabis, it's been this kind of pump and dump model. I think that as an investor, which there are very few, psychedelic funds in the space right now, I look at these companies and it's very easy for me. As I look at these companies, I'm not necessarily coaching them on how to run or operate their business. I think if you've been in the space long enough and you know and understand the community and who all is in the community is very, very small. I would argue the kind of tastemakers, thought leaders in the space is about, 100 individuals worldwide. There's a larger community that supports it, but really the people who've been moving the dial, it's quite small. I would say that from my perspective, I look at some of these companies that just have these IP portfolios and they're going to go into clinical trials and then drug development right off the bat. I'm not so much interested in. I think that there's a more holistic way to go about this. I think that there's a lot of these previous cannabis investors that are seeing this as kind of like the next cannabis wave, the next cannabis boom. And I just don't think there's a lot of thought going into the setting up and structuring of a lot of these companies. If you find, if you plug into the community first, you find, I think, the real thoughtful, conscious executives and entrepreneurs that are building the businesses that need to be supported. But from the outsider looking in, these companies that are going public, that have these big PR marketing announcements, as an investor, I would just caution each investor and say, like, cool, you may make some money on some of these opportunities, these public opportunities, but I think that I'd hope that we're entering a new phase of investment thesis that involves more of impact and making sure that you're investing in the right people and businesses as opposed to just good investments.
Okay. And so how do you see the psychedelics industry evolving? It seems like it's emerging, and I don't know much about it, but interested to learn where you think it's going.
I think that we are in, obviously, the first inning of kind of the psychedelic industry. I think that this movement tried to get started back in the 60s, and unfortunately, kind of Timothy Leary put a big target on his back and the psychedelic movement as a whole. And so here we are, what is this, 60 years later, trying to do it again. I think that in the next 3 years, we're going to have a lot of really interesting modalities being passed through the FDA clinical trial process. MDMA will be legalized for therapeutic application to treat PTSD, most likely by the end of 2021. Psilocybin looks just around the same time, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. Currently, right now in the United States, ketamine is being used in intravenous and intramuscular applications to treat treatment-resistant depression. It's not currently covered by insurance. So what we're seeing is, and back, a little bit of background, ketamine in high doses is a very psychedelic experience. And through that experience and through some of the other neurochemical mechanisms that are happening while you're under the dose of the ketamine, it's treating depression significantly better than standard SSRIs and antidepressants.
Really?
And the scary thing is for pharmaceutical companies is that racemic ketamine, which is the ketamine that they're using in these clinics, it costs, roughly $3 a dose. As a treatment-resistant depression on average costs a healthcare provider around $15,000 annually. So hypothetically, that same patient could go in for a few infusions a year for significantly less than what it would cost to pay the pharmaceuticals.
So what's the biggest change you see coming up? Is it these therapies going mainstream, or is it gaining acceptance? But what's the change that you see happening now?
I see, definitely going mainstream. I see the FDA validating a lot of these anecdotal claims that we've been seeing over the past years regarding psychedelics positively affecting mental health and trauma. I think that you're going to start to see these kind of psychedelic clinics pop up. I believe, don't quote me. No, you can quote me. That 3 years ago, there were somewhere around like 60 ketamine clinics in the United States. Today, there's somewhere around 380 ketamine clinics. So in a short period of time, there's been this big boom and this big rush because of the efficacy of this medicine to treat depression that's been happening. So a lot of these early entrepreneurs that are wanting to get into the psychedelic space are starting by partnering with a doctor and setting up these ketamine clinics. And then eventually, their hopes and goals are to, if they've got a menu of psychedelics, ketamine's the first one. In a year or so, you've got MDMA, 2 years, you got psilocybin, and then kind of keep adding to the list of offerings.
Great. So what's your investment thesis for psychedelics? What's your criteria here?
I'm interested in businesses that quantify the impact of psychedelic therapy, not only on mental health, but physical health. There's a business called capitation, where large healthcare providers will go out and they'll identify certain patient populations that they could use help in lowering their costs or their spend on. They'll find a private company that has experience in some new domain or new medical field that says that they can lower the healthcare spend on, say, a lupus patient by way of using these new therapies and modalities. That healthcare provider will come in, they'll cut a deal with this private company where the company will come in and then they'll say, all right, cool. Payer will say, whatever you save us per patient, we'll split with you. There's currently no platform or company out there doing this in the psychedelic space. I think over the next 5 years, there are going to be some of these startups that come in and they figure out how to actually quantify the impact of psychedelics to the bottom line of a large payer. And I think that's every large payer just wants to measure things. They want to understand how certain therapies are affecting their patients and effectively their bottom line. And I think that historically, you can talk to some of these large insurers and they'll all admit that they know that supplements and magnesium and vitamin D and stuff like that are beneficial, but because they can't measure it, they're not going to insure it. And some of these digital tools that you can use to actually, these quantified self tools that you can use to plug in what supplements you're wearing, biometrics captured through some sort of feedback loop, whether it's a Oura ring or an HRV, heart rate monitor. Those are the types of systems that you're going to see that large payers are going to be interested in capturing data through so they can understand which modalities to start supporting financially.
Can you talk about one or two startups that fit that thesis?
Yeah, I do. I mean, internally, I've been incubating a project, but no, we've not found anything yet.
Okay, great. So in the space, it's very early, it's bleeding edge. What are the challenges that you see your startups facing when they try to launch a business in the psychedelic space? Is it regulatory? Is it market acceptance? But where do you see them spending their time?
Regulatory is a big one. There's really kind of three buckets, I'd say, that are in the psychedelic space right now in that market, in regards to like kind of market segments or business segments. It's drug development, which, you need to understand regulations. That's biotech. You need to have a strong science background. That's a beast of its own. And that's a very expensive business to get into, the drug development kind of sector. There's the clinic business, and that's, you're going to deal with HIPAA and regulations there. You're going to have to find a doctor to partner with in your business to actually be able to, you hang your hat on his license. And then the other one is these digital tools. So data and analytics, social networks, communities, things like that to help actually quantify the application of these therapies and the impact of the medicines. Yeah.
And along the same lines about investors and investing in this space, what's the challenge most investors have? Is it finding quality deals? Is it finding ones with traction? Where do you see investors struggling in this space?
I think around management teams. I think it's hard to find strong management teams. I think that, I would leave it at management teams. That's the hardest thing to find.
I guess it's a new area, so there's just not a rich pool of experienced managers in this space yet. Is that the issue?
That is absolutely the issue, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're slowly but surely coming. Yeah, for sure.
Do you think there's crossover from the cannabis space where people can take lessons learned from there and bring to psychedelics, or you think it's just completely different?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think it's completely different. I think you're seeing a lot of these people come over from the cannabis space just because it feels like a natural progression into the psychedelic space, because a lot of people consider cannabis a psychedelic. I think that they're different skill sets. This looks much more like healthcare and the pharmaceutical business than it does cannabis. Cannabis is more agriculture, consumer packaged goods business, supply chain. This is really a lot of this is focused around regulation, going through the FDA process, and just traditional healthcare and understanding insurance and payer models and integration.
Okay. A moment ago, you talked about treating depression as being a good application or having good success there. What other subsectors or applications do you think are good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue in this space?
Yeah, obviously depression. Yeah, that's a big one. Anxiety, PTSD, early childhood trauma, which is really falls underneath the anxiety, PTSD, depression bucket, and then ADHD. So focus and performance, human performance, I think is going to be a big market for this. Microdosing has been, something that's been trending for the past year now. And the microdosing movement really stems from, they say, Silicon Valley executives using, small forms of psilocybin or LSD to kind of enhance their productivity. And I do see I hear conversations. I've been hanging out in Austin for the past few weeks, and it's not just happening out in LA. You've got people in rural, Texas areas that are talking about this. So that's something that I think is going more mainstream, is the microdosing. And then behind that is going to be the larger, more integrative trauma treating applications.
What is the efficacy of microdosing? Do you think that's a very strong case, or do you think that still has to be proved?
I think Johns Hopkins might be doing a microdosing study right now. There's a few groups that I'm not going to pull on the names, but they're researchable. There's a few different initiatives globally right now studying the effects of microdosing, both psilocybin and LSD. And I'll attest to the efficacy myself personally. I'm not a researcher, but I'm doing my own research, and give it the thumbs up.
Cool. Okay. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think that we as investors, as entrepreneurs, as a society, have a real opportunity to disrupt the current paternal healthcare system. I think that there's a better way to go about healing and treating people. And I think that a lot of these modalities, they support inner growth. And I think that once, I'm a big believer that our current political system and some of our financial systems are a bit broken. And as somebody who's passionate about creating change, you look at what's the best way for me to actually go about creating change. Do you run for office? Do you get out in the streets and shout and riot? And I have a deep, firm belief that if we heal the people, the systems will be healed in turn. And I think that using these modalities to heal personal trauma influences the system as a whole. And I think that this movement is bigger than ourselves. When we heal ourselves, we get to go out and we are more conscious and empathetic to healing and treating and helping other people. And so I guess the thing that I would say is that I don't think we should take this opportunity lightly. I think that this is a big movement. And I think that we have the opportunity to really create a lot of change and heal a lot of people and heal our planet in turn. And so as investors are looking at this space, I would ask each individual to ask themselves why they're doing this. And if they don't know, maybe go do your own research yourself. Check out, there's a great website, doubleblind.com. It's or doubleblindmagazine.com. The magazine's called Double Blind, but they do a really good job of just talking about and educating people on psychedelics and the research that's happening. And I'd suggest, go do your own research. And if you need to go do your own personal exploration, do that too in states and cities, that are legal. Because there are, there's now, about 5 cities, I think DC, Denver, Santa Cruz, some of these municipalities that decriminalize these medicines. And so you can now currently do them legally in the United States, which I think is great. So, yeah.
It sounds like there's tremendous cost savings here and potential new solutions to mitigate depression, anxiety, and so many other things that it's going to be a great boom. We don't have to rely upon very expensive pharmaceuticals. We can rely upon more natural solutions. So it sounds like it holds great promise there.
Yeah, I agree, man. This is the kind of there's a saying kind of going around that the exodus of big pharma has begun. And I do know that there are definitely synthetic pharmaceutical drugs that do very great specific things. So I'm not knocking the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, because I think that there are a lot of drugs out there that are very necessary. But I think that nature has its own form of medicine that we kind of pushed to the side for a long time. And I think that we should maybe look at that first before we go these other pharmaceutical routes. And I think that's what's happening right now. People are, through education and research and accessibility, we're getting the opportunity to explore if that's true. And time will tell.
Well, that's great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
My email is forward@ultranative.com. That's ultranative.com. You can go to ultranative.com, obviously. And feel free to shoot me a question, or, happy to jump on the phone and do whatever. I'm passionate about this space.
Great. Well, I'll put those in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Yeah. Hey, Hall, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate what you're doing, and thanks for thinking of me.
Great. Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.